Hello, everyone. It's me, David Chen, and I'm here with Melissa Tamminga from Seattle Screen Scene. She's also a film professor at Whatcom Community College. We're here today to talk about Leigh Whannell's The Invisible Man, which is out in theaters this weekend. So this movie is a reimagining of the character of the Invisible Man, but what's interesting about it is it tells it from the perspective of the person that he's terrorizing, right? The Invisible Man is about Elizabeth Moss's character. She plays Cecilia, and she is kind of in a domestic partnership with the character of the Invisible Man before she suspects he fakes his death and then is terrorizing her after the fact.
Yeah.
Right? So let's talk about overall thoughts on the movie. What do you think of The Invisible Man?
I would have to say that going into it, I didn't have really high expectations, but kind of immediately, my first reaction going into the film, I was immediately caught up in the suspense and the tension. One of the key strengths of the film, I think, is the way that the filmmaking really so beautifully takes you into the space of Elizabeth Moss's character, Cecilia, and the sense of these POV shots where you do constantly feel like she is being watched. And also this really beautiful use of off-screen space or negative space where there's often the camera framing is on an empty room. And then there's maybe a pan where it feels like someone is watching.
Yeah.
And often these kind of behind the head shots on Elizabeth Moss's character. I haven't felt that way for a movie for a long time, where I was genuinely tense and genuinely kind of like, I'm not sure I can handle this kind of a thing. So I wasn't quite expecting that to be so effective. And I thought that was really beautifully done. I also feel like Elizabeth Moss's performance is one of the just wonderful strengths of this film. She is so good. The film last year, Her Smell, is one that I was really impressed with. I think that's a film also that shows her, she has this ability to have this very taut, tense performance where you just feel like she's completely on the edge of something, but then she can take it way down to something that is really quiet. And she shows that range in this film too, and it really takes you inside her experience. And then I think the other strength of this film that I came out really being quite impressed with is just the thematic elements of this film and all the resonances of the things of what this film is about on that level. And we'll probably have to get into a bit more of that with spoilers, but those are the things that immediately kind of stood out to me going into it. What about you?
Yeah, I agree. I think this is a really enjoyable film from the perspective of a horror thriller, you know. Yeah. And I put enjoyable in quotation marks because for most of the runtime, you're watching a woman be terrorized, right? And so it's not, you're not enjoying it for her, but Elizabeth Moss's performance sells it so well. It takes the Invisible Man, it makes it a metaphor for gaslighting, right? Gaslighting that domestic abusers do to their victims. And I thought that was really effective. It's kind of like an interesting take that once the take has been depicted, it's like, I don't know why I never thought of it like that, you know, but now that it's been done, it's like, yeah, of course, that's a very obvious way to do it. So I thought it's kind of like a brilliant way of like reinventing the character.
Yeah. Absolutely. Because all the other, I mean, H.G. Wells' original story, right, is centered on the man.
Yeah.
And then the Universal Monster movie is also centered on the man.
Most depictions of Invisible Man are like he is the protagonist.
Right. Exactly. And it is kind of that sort of mad scientist sort of thing that you have, the Dr. Frankenstein character of this arrogance kind of leads to their own downfall, but it's about their downfall.
Yeah. But it's also about how being invisible kind of divorces you from any sense of consequence and morality, right? Like if no one can see you, then you can do whatever you want and you'll probably do terrible things, right? Most movies or depictions or writings have been like exploring that psychological decline versus what this movie does, which is like, what if that's an external force that you're trying to fight against? So I thought that was really great. I also agree with you about the use of negative space. A movie that this may remind people of is Paranormal Activity. I don't know if you saw that.
I've seen some references to that,
You know, in Paranormal Activity, you're seeing like these tableaus of domestic spaces and you're kind of like, did I see something move? Was there something there?
Right, exactly.
And that's what you're always doing in this movie. You never know if someone's standing literally right there. And that's the tension that the movie really plays up and does a great job of.
Right? It's so good. Yeah. There's the kind of cuts from her face watching something to that negative space, and you really have no idea whether he's there or not, and you are in this heightened state of trying to watch for every single detail, every camera movement. Did you see something move?
Right.
Did you not? And getting back to the way that the film explores the impact on the person who is the target of the Invisible Man. I think it not just shows sort of the abuse that this person is suffering, but also the way that it infects the entire system and the entire world in which she lives. So that even those people, her friends, her family members who are her allies, they are also kind of infected by this invisibility of this person and the power of this person. And it has all these resonances, I think, in the real world, where it's not just this one person who is traumatizing another person. It's about the entire system.
Yeah.
And the way that Cecilia here is caught in that system, and everywhere she goes for help, she's kind of blocked.
One of the things that this movie does a great job of illustrating is that the abuse doesn't end once the person gets away.
Exactly.
Like psychologically, the damage is still ongoing and has consequences thereafter. And also, I think what you're saying is that even people who are supporting the victim can often
feel they're supporting
the victim, can often find that they're at cross purposes. That they're not doing the thing that the victim needs, or vice versa, and that can create further complications that make things more challenging for everyone.
Right.
So
exactly.
I didn't know that an Invisible Man horror movie could illustrate those things, but I thought it did a good job of it.
Yeah, it really does. And I think it's interesting that it kind of goes through these phases in terms of how her friends and family support her, where even in the moment they believe that she has been abused, but even though they acknowledge the abuse, there's still some level of, she's kind of overreacting a little bit. Mm-hmm. Like, can't you just go outside and get the mail? Can't you just do these things? And so there's some level of even of gaslighting, even in the moment when they actually believe that she has been brutally hurt.
Right. I do want to give a shout out to Elizabeth Moss's performance as well.
Yep.
She's amazing in this movie. There is a scene in this movie where Elizabeth Moss has a conversation with a doorway.
Yeah.
That is
that's such
amazing.
A good scene.
It's amazing.
Really, really
it's just
good scene.
It's like, wow, this is like what acting, like she has nothing to play off of, and she's still bringing it. And so I thought she did a great job.
Yep.
I also think that, there's many tense sequences of this movie. This is a pretty low budget movie. I think the budget was around $7 million or something like that, which is like incredible what they were able to achieve for that much.
It feels really slick for that low budget. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, there weren't that many locations, but like you're never thinking about the fact that like, oh, this is a low budget movie. I thought they really accomplished a lot from a visual effects perspective with what they were given. So wanted to just shout those things out before we get into spoilers. Anything else you want to say before we dive in? I think overall, like, I thought it was a great horror thriller movie, and just know that if you're going to watch it, it may be triggering.
I was just going to say, I do think when I was sitting there, I actually have a couple of friends who are going through some difficult situations right now. And one of them was going to come with me to the theater. And I thought, I'm so glad she didn't come, because I think this would be a really, really tough, very much a triggering movie to watch for many people. So kind of know what you're going into before you get there.
Agreed. Just it's not to say you shouldn't watch the movie. Like, some people can use movies to process their trauma or whatever.
It could be very cathartic. Yeah.
But just know that that is a significant portion of the movie is some pretty traumatizing content. So.
Right. Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Let's get into spoilers for The Invisible Man starting right now. So starting this point, we're going to be talking spoilers for the movie. If you don't want to be spoiled, tune out, come back, rewatch this video when you're done watching. So right off the bat, the opening scene I thought was a masterclass in
it's so good.
Showing and not telling. There's like no dialogue in the opening scene, but you already get a sense of like what the relationship is between these people, what one of them's trying to accomplish. It's actually in the trailer. One of the trailers, this scene is like Elizabeth Moss like slowly trying to escape from this house, and you see it. There's no like text on the screen that's like, this character is like trying to escape. It's just like you just see, and then pretty quickly you get what exactly she's doing, and it's really effective filmmaking, I thought.
Oh yeah, I really loved that opening sequence for the exact reason. I mean, you go into it and you're like, this is cinema. This is what cinema is. I mean, the purely visual storytelling, the use of sound too. I thought that the sound design and the music was really effective in this film too. There are a couple of moments when there are some sort of sound jump scares, as it were, but I felt like it really kind of pulled it back and let the visuals and just sort of subtle sound design do the talking.
I saw the movie in Dolby Atmos, and that was really effective because so much of the movie you're not seeing it, you're hearing it.
Exactly.
And the sound design is super important for a movie like this. And I would recommend like a Dolby or an IMAX viewing, but definitely present in that first scene as well, where she's like listening for anything that might upset the situation that she's in. So I thought the first scene was really tremendous.
Yeah. And I think it set up the space in which she's been living really, really effectively too, that you get the sense of this fortress-like house, very wealthy, clearly. So you get a sense of the power that is being held over her just because of that sense of the space and the wealth, and also the fortress-like quality that is in this space.
Yeah.
So
it feels like a prison break, basically.
It does, and that setup then impacts everything that you're thinking about later on. That's what she's escaping from, and that kind of power and kind of restriction is what she's going to have to deal with for the rest of the film.
Yeah, for sure. Were there any moments from the movie that stand out to you as being like particularly effective moments? I'll say one, which is that probably the thing that most shocked me was there's a scene in the trailer where she throws paint on the guy.
Yep.
And I was bummed out that I'd seen it in the trailer. I was like,
Right.
oh, like I'm going to see that coming, that when she does it. And also, I should point out that, by the way, for like a significant portion of the movie, you don't know if there is an invisible dude.
Right.
Like
That's
she actually,
really interesting tension.
She actually could be like seeing it or making it up.
Yep.
And then I think the moment when she throws the paint on him, that's the first moment when you really
like when you're for sure
like, oh, like unless she's really creative with how she's like inventing this guy in her head, it's a real dude and not just and so I thought that was like that was a shock. Even though I saw it coming, it was still shocking to me because they played it like this big sound effect, and there had been like minutes of silence beforehand. So I thought it was like really, really effective.
Yeah, and because of the use of negative space and off-screen space before then, when you actually see it, it has all the more impact.
It scared the crap out of me.
It's horrifying. It really is horrifying.
Yeah.
It's again, like I was saying, it was one of those movies where I'm like, I had to kind of tell myself it's only a movie. It's only a movie because I felt so on edge for that part of it. There is one scene where she has, I don't think she's really being terrorized by him in a really significant way yet, but she goes out for a job interview. And it's a really interesting scene because I think that's one of the scenes that makes you realize this is not just kind of a personal thing between her and this particular evil man. There's also, again, an entire structure and system that has to do with patriarchy and wealth and power, and the ways that women have to navigate the space. So she's coming to this job interview. She's very nervous. She's brought her portfolio. She's clearly has, you see later on that she's extremely talented, that she, is someone who should have a career. So she sets up the interview begins, and he asks her to tell him a little bit about herself. And she says, well, I went to Paris. And he says some line like, oh, is that where all the beautiful women go? And it's this sort of line that, okay, on the surface of it, it seems pretty harmless, but it's an immediate indication to her that she is being seen not for her talent primarily as what she's going to bring to the company in terms of her intellect and her skills for the career, but he is immediately saying to her, I'm telling you you're a beautiful woman, and I'm going to use that. And again, it's one of those moments where I think if you were to tell someone what happened later on, it wouldn't seem like that big of a deal. But in the construction of that space and in kind of her coming from a man who has been controlling her and using her, it has this just waves of impact.
It's more sinister than it would come off if she hadn't just gone through this traumatizing event. Right?
And I think this guy is a nice guy.
Yeah.
He seems harmless. And, you would never bring sexual harassment charges against him probably, but it's just one of those things that is really subtly showing the power dynamic. And
right. And I think you're saying like our societal systems are kind of set up to punish women like the character in this movie, the main
Exactly.
character in this movie, and like protect the other people.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's talk about the ending of the film.
Yeah.
Because I have to say that I wasn't a fan of it. I wasn't a fan of the last 10 to 15 minutes of this movie. And I think that the reason is not necessarily because, at the end of the movie, she basically triumphs over her oppressor. I have no issue with that. I have no issue with that. My only problem is with basically the technique of the storytelling, which is, there's this huge kind of prison break out from a psychiatric hospital, and then she shoots the Invisible Man.
Right.
And then you find out, no, it's actually not Adrian, right? It's his brother.
It's his brother.
Tom. So it's unclear to me whether or not it's Adrian or Tom that's been like the Invisible Man the entire time.
Yep.
Certainly, it's been Tom since like she tried to stab herself with a pen, right? Because then like they do the prison break from there, and then she shoots him in. So I think that's all one Invisible Man.
Right. Okay.
But then like before, maybe it was Tom, maybe it wasn't Tom. But then after that, I'm thinking, oh, the movie's over. It was actually just Tom like going nuts the whole time. But plot twist, Adrian is actually alive.
Yeah.
And Elizabeth Moss's character thinks he's been pulling the strings the entire time. So then, like but at this point, my mind is kind of like thinking back through, like, oh, like what was that? Does that scene make sense now? Does that scene make sense now? And Leigh Whannell, writer director of this movie, I was listening to commentary for his other movie, Upgrade, which is also very good, and he was saying, yeah, I love these like final act twists that like make you recontextualize the whole movie and make you think back. And I'm like, I enjoy those as well, but like it feels like it went a little bit too far this time, because basically, if Adrian is pulling the strings the whole time, then it's like you're thinking like, well, how did he tie himself up for a few days, and like,
right, exactly.
like how did that all play out? But then it doesn't make sense if Tom was doing everything, because why would Tom care if Elizabeth Moss had Adrian's baby? That doesn't make any sense to me. So it had to be Adrian then, right?
Yes.
But then it's like then you're thinking like, okay, how did the mechanics of that work? Like, is he blackmailing Tom somehow, or what? And these are just not thoughts I want to be having when this movie is like right about to finish the swing. It's about to like get to the end, and I'm like, but then I'm thinking to myself, how does any of this make sense? So that was my reaction to the ending. I wasn't a huge fan of like the multiple twists after. Like, it's like, okay, first it's Tom. Okay, that's already a big twist. Then it's like, by the way, Adrian's alive. Another twist. By the way, Adrian's masterminding the whole thing. Okay, third twist. That all happens in like 8 minutes in the movie. Wasn't a fan. What did you think?
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, it wasn't a clean twist, as it were. I mean, we just watched the classic film Psycho with my class, and it is one of the interesting things about Psycho is it does have these two major twists in it that actually most of my students had no idea. They weren't spoiled coming in at all. But then talking about these particular twists later on with my students, those twists, well, especially the final twist, is one where you're like, oh, now everything kind of makes sense, and it all sort of clicks into place.
Right. And that's what you want a twist to do.
That's what you want a twist to do.
Oh, I get it now, right?
Yes.
What didn't happen
But
in this
doesn't,
movie.
no, it just feels like it's a little bit more muddled. And I will say, I mean, maybe thematically that kind of works, because in a way, the whole time, people are really not believing that Adrian has come back and is haunting her. And she's being gaslighted and saying, no, this can't be true. This can't be real. He can't still be abusing you in this way. But she is insistent the entire time that, no, this is, okay, Tom may have been an agent, but it's Adrian that's pulling the strings. And I think in a way, because of the muddledness of the twist, it does test us as an audience to ask, do we believe her? Because I think she doesn't have any doubt that the whole time, however it's worked out, it's been Adrian. And I think then finally what she does at the end, which is kill Adrian, we do have to be on board with her at that point, I think.
I've seen that opinion as well online, that like the final act twists kind of put you in her position or make you more sympathetic to her position of like, who knows what is real at this point? Like it's the whole time in the movie, everyone's been like, we don't believe you, Elizabeth Moss. What you're saying is nuts. And like now this twist is so ridiculous that now you are in the position, as an audience, are like saying like this. Actually, no, Adrian really did it, and it's like, well, that sounds pretty wild, don't you think?
Yeah, maybe. Although I believed it. Like, I really will say that I thought Tom was an agent of Adrian. That I didn't really feel like it was Tom the whole time on some level.
Yeah. There's this moment at the end where she says, like, please confess to me. And he doesn't confess.
He doesn't do it.
But he does a little thing where he says, like, you know, our life will be full of, like, surprises, which is, like, their magic. Right. It's like their word. It's like when the jukebox starts playing their song is the word surprise. And so, like, that's his kind of way of confessing. Is that how you interpreted it? Or?
Kind of. Yeah. I mean, I did think that, if he is the master manipulator that he is, no, he wouldn't confess even to her, because he's never really going to be honest with her and give her any control over him, because that's what he's all about, is control. One thing I thought was interesting, and I'm not sure if I fully liked the way that it actually played out, but I think thematically it's interesting. So there's a moment when, after they have found Adrian tied up in the basement, and she and James are talking, and James is like, well, this is the way we have to play it in order to get we have to get the justice system to address this. And we have to say that it was Tom the whole time, basically. And kind of from just the practical criminal justice perspective, that is what makes sense. That's the practical thing that kind of has to happen. And it sort of reminded me of just the way that, say, for example, the Harvey Weinstein trial has played out, that we believe that this immense amount of abuse has happened, but in terms of how the criminal justice system actually works, is he's only going to be charged with a couple of specific crimes, and everything else is just going to be like, well, we think it probably happened, but it's not practically going to work its way out. And I kind of felt a little bit of that tension there, where James, the police officer, was like, well, whatever is true, you have to say that this is what happened, because that's the only way it's going to work within the system.
Right.
And then the final act is her basically saying, no, like, if I do that, I will never have resolution.
Right. If the justice system cannot give me justice, I must seek justice elsewhere.
I have to do it myself.
Right.
Yeah. Which is not a promotion of like women then going out for revenge, or not revenge, but getting justice on their own. But I think it is an interesting statement of how the system will kind of continue to fail. And on some level, there are going to be consequences that women are going to feel that are never going to be resolved by the system that we have as it is right now.
Understood.
And I thought that was interesting.
Yeah. So any other thoughts about how the Invisible Man did his work in this film?
Yeah. I mean, one thing that I wasn't quite sure about is there were several scenes in which it seemed like he was too powerful to be a real person.
He was a little overpowered.
He was a little bit overpowering. I mean, maybe even in, say, that final sequence where it's James and the Invisible Man fighting. I mean, James is this amazingly buff police officer. And I kind of thought, if you're in that close grappling with someone, wouldn't James be able to maybe overpower him in that moment, rather than being just like beaten?
Well, the thing that really bothered me was when she throws the paint on him, and then theoretically he like rinses it off in the sink.
Just gone. Yeah, right. Like, I mean, the paint would be a little stickier than that.
Yeah, it would get on some things. But one thing that I think is great about the movie, though, in its defense, is like it doesn't explain the technology at all.
It doesn't explain it.
And that's what's kind of cool.
I liked that too.
It's just like, it just lets you fill in all the gaps. Like, oh, there's these cameras that see it, and they can. And it's just like, that's pretty cool that it does it. Because I think a different movie would have like been like, and using advanced fiber optic technology.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I felt that it was enough within the realm of possibility for you to then believe that it could happen. And if it would have tried to explain it too much, then it probably wouldn't have worked.
Right, which is its own feat, by the way. It's like, it's actually really an accomplishment to like get the audience to suspend their disbelief, and I thought they did a good job of that.
Yeah,
sure.
and one thing I really did like was I was a little worried going into the film that it would end up being, oh, it's supernatural, or it's all psychological, it's all in our head. But I did really like that there is a scientific explanation for it, even if they don't necessarily give it to us. But there's still that really nice tension of, is it all in her head, or is this actually real? And I think there was a nice dance between those two kind of things that really emphasized the theme of someone who has wealth and power, and just the power of a man can wield this in such a way that it feels supernatural, or that it feels like it's all in your head, or that it couldn't possibly actually be real rooted in the reality of the world in which we live.
Yeah.
So I liked that tension.
One thing about the movie that I really appreciated that I think we touched upon earlier is I once read this study when I was in college in my social psychology class about how if you were to take a normal person who has nothing psychologically wrong with them and put them in a psychiatric ward, their actions would then be interpreted as being abnormal in some way. Like, oh,
right.
like if you're like a person who likes to journal, they'll be like, oh, like patient, exhibits like obsessive tendencies around journaling,
right.
And it's like,
right, exactly. You can't win.
Yeah. But I thought that was interesting because it's like, as Elizabeth Moss is getting more and more terrified, her ability to then convince others of the real threat is impaired.
Yes, more and more so.
There's this amazing scene when she's like having dinner with her sister, and she's trying to convey like she's like really on the knife's edge, and she's like really like, I'm not crazy. I found proof that that I'm not crazy. And then, of course, like then
in that moment,
her sister is then murdered, and she's framed for the crime in like fairly horrifying fashion.
Yes,
the way that's filmed, by the way, is amazing. Like everything like slows down.
That was such a really good scene.
The sound design is incredible, and then you realize like. I think this is one of the first times that I realized kind of the legal implications of an invisible man, right? Like this technology would be world changing because like you could easily frame people for crimes.
Exactly.
You could send emails as them because you could look at them and watch them type their password. You could like put weapons into their hands without, and everyone would see that they had the weapon. And, it's just like,
exactly.
Wow, like what a terrifying thought. And these are kinds of like, scary thoughts I want to be having when I'm watching a horror thriller with science fiction overtones. Is like, whoa, like I didn't even think about any of this. But anyway, point being like Elizabeth Moss in that scene is like seems unhinged.
Exactly.
And from
a reasonable person's perspective, that of course she seems unhinged.
Yeah. So it's kind of unfortunate the way in which it works is like that the more you need people's help, the less able you are to obtain it because you seem like you don't know what you're saying.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. It's kind of that whole framing of like kind of women are crazy too. And I think if you have that sort of larger framing, and this is a specific context where it gets worse and worse, but I think I was thinking about even the larger implications of that the idea of women are so quick to be accused of just being crazy. And I think that the more you then try to prove that you're not, it kind of compounds into itself. I was thinking about the resonance of something like the film Vertigo 2, where in a way, the entire premise of the plot in that film of Gavin Elster wanting to murder his wife, it's dependent on this idea that everyone around him believe that Madeline is crazy. And his plot wouldn't work if that premise didn't hold, and no one really questions whether she is or isn't. And so, I mean, I think actually there are a lot of Hitchcockian kind of references in this film, and that was one of them. Another one was just the Rebecca idea of being haunted by someone who is dead, and that impacting everything that you do and everything that you are. I also thought of that scene we were just talking about in the restaurant where Emily is killed. The scene in North by Northwest in the United Nations where Cary Grant is essentially framed for the murder. There's an invisible assassin that kills the person, and the guy falls onto Cary Grant, and Cary Grant has the knife, and there's this like shot of him with the knife. So I don't know if Whannell was specifically thinking of all those things.
I suspect he was.
But there's a lot in there, and it wasn't direct enough for you to feel like, oh, he's just ripping Hitchcock off. But it just felt really quite original within the context of the scenes that he was offering. So I think just thinking about Hitchcock as a director too, and sort of just his themes and even sort of the problems with women and sexual harassment against women, it just kind of makes this film all the more a rich object to kind of think about.
All right. Well, I think that's a great place to wrap it up. It's been fun talking with you about this movie. That's our review of The Invisible Man, the new movie out in theaters right now by writer-director Leigh Whannell. Melissa, where can people find your work?
I'm at Seattle Screen Scene. I'm also on Letterboxd. You can find me at Twitter at 1 April Day.
And you can follow me on Twitter at Dave Chensky. I'm also on Letterboxd. I'll put a link below. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, hit like or subscribe, hit that bell icon. I'll be cranking out more videos the rest of the year, so make sure you don't miss any of them. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.